Well, I'm sorry it's been such a long time since I delivered episode 3, but as promised, here we go with number 4. You know, I've got some great friends who are lawyers, or should I say I have some great lawyers who are friends, but the hassle some can cause with a written word can be extremely frustrating when you want to get on with a story. The mention of Morton's ballet lessons was not intended to keep you on the edge of your seats for so long, but my previous 3 videos were examined with a tooth comb at great length over a long period of time, before it was realised that you can't be had up for telling the truth. Morton did indeed have ballet lessons and worked out at Pineapple Studios in London, and many a time I would see him pirouetting around our studio and practising his newly learnt moves in front of a mirror. We all had a good laugh, but in actual fact he definitely had the makings of a Rudolf Nureyev. And this was all part of his star makeup and flamboyance, and over time he certainly proved to be one of the all-time great frontmen of rock bands. So the publishing deal has been signed, and no point in my raising the roof about the manner in which the band committed themselves, or rather were committed, to ATV Music. It was later bought by Michael Jackson, and then he sold it off to Sony. Anyway, for now it was the next challenge, and that was essentially to get a record deal. Many inaccurate stories have been told about how we signed to Warner's. I know it annoyed me greatly that Terry always made out to visiting record companies, and in those days there were a lot of them, that Rendezvous was his studio complex, not the truth that in fact it was owned by me and had a reputation of attracting bands like Dexy's Midnight Runners. In fact, my whole involvement from first discovering a-ha and then maintaining them and recording them never came out of these showcases. But still, what was best for the band was my priority, and I swallowed my pride as Terry Slater, my business partner, was always the big shot as each visitor turned up to view our 3 young hopefuls from Norway. I remember well the day that Warner's came down. Terry Slater was cursing the time of their arrival as a horse he'd intended to back at the bookies next door romped home at odds of 10 to 1. "That visit has cost me money," he fumed, but in actual fact he couldn't have been further from the truth. Yes, other companies had seen and passed on the band, and we did put together a typical industry wind-up about everyone actually wanting to be the first to sign them, but it was the enthusiasm of Andy Wickham, head of A&R at WEA in London, that led to the president of Warner Brothers, Mo Austin from Burbank, California, giving the nod to what proved to be a very good long-term record contract. Inevitably, it also took a long time to reach the final draft of the production agreement, the record deal. It always does, and this is why I've always hoped that a child of mine would become a music lawyer. They are always the winners, the ones who can't lose. The more disagreement that's stirred up, the larger and more lucrative the whole their invoice becomes greater. Well, I remember the 78-page contract eventually arriving at Rendezvous Studios for signature. I still have a copy to this day. I had to sign every page on behalf of the management company, as we were supplying the services of Paul, Mags and Morton. They too had to make their mark on every page, and my studio manager, Dave Hayter, was the witness. It was exciting though. I'd signed an artist contract with Atlantic Records some 5 years before, but that was just for 2 singles. This was a 5-album contract with a very healthy advance. Terry Slater was consumed totally with his main project at the moment, reuniting the Everly Brothers for a historic reunion concert at the Albert Hall. This meant the whole onus was on me to coordinate all aspects of the band's lives. Warner's had loved the sounds of the demos that we'd put together, and the choice of producer for the debut album was very important. At the time, Terry and the band had decided it had to be a name producer with a big track record to go with a big Warner's contract. Tony Mansfield was initially chosen for the job. He was very successful at this time in the early 80s. However, I, as the eventual producer of all but 2 of the tracks on Hunting High and Low, had to get my own legal representation to get even a credit on the album cover. At the time I was young and up and coming, but the band and Terry Slater in particular kept saying that he didn't want me to have my name on the record sleeve or be credited for anything that I had done. It was bothering him that my contribution would be there for all to see. But I did stick with it, and I did get a mention. But this production, as well as the management involvement of mine, all came after we'd taken on Mansfield, who spent 6 weeks at Pete Townshend's Eel Pie studio laying down the tracks that we demoed at Rendezvous, and which were to make up virtually the whole of the first album. The 6 weeks they were homed up in the studio was the first time I'd had a break from Norwegian voices for 2 years. I only occasionally called in to see them for a game of pool and the wonderful view of the River Thames from the studio balcony. But then I get a phone call from Terry. Warner's had heard what Tony had done with the tracks, and they didn't like it. They're going to write off the money advance, they're going to tear up the contract, and the band are going to be on the boat back to Oslo. He sounded quite hysterical, understandably so. We'd got our deal, and now it was completely worthless. Our big chance seemed to have gone. Instinctively I said to Terry, "Okay, I'll go and see Andy Wickham and see if I can change his mind." I told Terry to go home, get some rest, and I jumped straight in my car to go to WEA in Broadwick Street, West 1, London. An hour later, the deal was back on. Apparently, the record company felt that the magic of the aha sound on the demos from Rendezvous had disappeared, and amongst other things, the vocals no longer featured in the way that they'd expected. So I pleaded with Andy to give me 2 weeks back in the Eel Pie studio to turn it round. And luckily this he agreed to do on the one condition that I sent the band home for a break and didn't tell them what the plan was. He gave me complete control over the aha album, saying that Terry just wasn't on the same wavelength anymore with the strain of the Everly Brothers reunion and all that went with it. But at least we did have another chance. It was an enormous challenge for me. All of our careers depended on it, but I was determined to win Warner's and Andy Wickham over. I look forward to seeing you all again for episode 5 and the reactions of the band to my work. It's well worth watching.